parking lot?
Do you want to do parking lot today?
Oh, that was gonna be next one.
Or are we going to wait and finish up later?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because I still have some numbers to crunch at these, like.
Yeah, okay, next week.
I'll mention
But
that.
as long as we found it.
Yeah, you got it.
Can I see it?
Not much, just.
Oh, it was
receipt
just
for
your
information.
update.
It's just a receipt for, because a gentleman came in and expressed.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's all coming back to me now.
Yeah. Oh, that's like Celine Dion's song. I won't sing it for you. No, I'm not that good.
December 1st, okay.
So Candace did re-upload the budget document under the December 1st budget deliberations meeting. If you are having trouble accessing it, should be there now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll start today's budget deliberations. So we had a good day yesterday. We are a little bit limited in time today. We're going to go till noon today. Given the breadth of the material that we still have to cover, we will in all likelihood still have a ways to go. So when Candace sent out our schedules, she did give us some more tentative days booked. So we'll see what we can do today up till lunch. And then we'll probably, in all likelihood, be back on the 7th. It's in our calendars right now from 9:30 till 3 for further deliberations. So in all likelihood, we will be back for that. Just be mindful. Like I said, there is a lot of material to cover. Lots of good questions yesterday. Let's keep down that path. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's not crucial for us to do this fast. Let's do it right and ask the right questions, and we'll get it done. So with that, does that kind of cover that, Jen?
Yep, no, that's great.
Awesome.
So I was just going to add, Tori, that I think when it comes to the parking lot, we'll revisit that. So gives Devin some time to get some numbers figured out and some further information on a couple items. And we'll start a new operating parking lot that we can address too. And we should have that information for the 7th, if not any of it later today.
Okay, thank you. And I should mention, Lauren is at the dentist again this morning, so he will be a little late in joining us, but he will be joining us.
Okay. If you go to page 20 of your iCompass document there again, I'll just direct you back to the impact summary, just as a refresh that we're looking at about a 1.621% increase on the proposed budget or draft budget that you have before you. Went through it yesterday with the legislated adjustments of $420,750. Budget additions or changes that were made internally by administration of $434,605, and then efficiencies and cost savings of over $600,000. So that brings us to our net of the $253,000 increase from the 2021 budget. I think we'll start with council first, just because it's easy. So in your document, I think it's page 67 is the cover page. And we can just roll straight down to page 70, and 71 gives a summary. So that first item, the transfers from reserves, that is strictly for the 2022 strategic planning session. We always do budget for an annual planning session. However, this year we increased it to, it'll be a bigger planning session. It'll be away and, where is it here? I might not have, there it is. It's in E2, sorry. So you'll see it in this E2 number. And also to have a facilitator there, so there's some additional costs associated with that. So rather than have the whole budget and tax support increase by that $15,000, we'll just transfer from the council discretionary reserve to offset that difference. Now, when it comes to wages, I know we talked about that briefly when we were in another regular council meeting, and we were going to bring back at budget what to do with council wages, just because historically, so in 2021, we made a change where there was a Reeves salary, I guess you could call it, or annual pay, and council annual pay with no separate pay for Deputy Reeve because the duties were shared throughout the year. Previous to that, everybody was paid on a per diem basis. So every meeting they attended, regular council meeting, committee meeting, out of county related meetings, were paid a half day or a full day per diem, depending on the length of the meeting. And then the Reeve and Deputy Reeve had a slightly higher rate than the rest of the council. So what I did was, it was kind of difficult to do a fair comparison, because in previous years, like I said, it was per diem, and it all depended on how many meetings people attended, if they went to conferences, you know, just the activity of each counselor. So I just took an average of those counselors. I figured that was the safest way to do it in those years. It's not the best, but it does give you a bit of a insight from back to 2015 of the Reeve to Deputy Reeve portions. Now again, you'll see highs and lows, and that is just all depending upon attendance, basically, and what they submitted for their per diems. So the 2021 budget was the year that we implemented I'll call it a salary for lack of a better term, based on, I guess, kind of historical numbers and what we thought was fair. And as you can see, the Deputy Reeve and rest of council were paid the same. So the 2022 proposed budget is still sitting that way, with the Deputy Reeve and council at the same rate, and a 1.5% increase across the board for all of them. So there will need to be a bit of direction from council there as to if you want to make any change to that, as far as the Deputy Reeve rate or not, or leave it. That's completely up to council and for your discussion. So if we do, there would be a slight change, obviously, to the budget, but, you know, you'd have to determine what that number looks like and the significance. And we would have to also bring back we wouldn't have to bring back the remuneration, because I think it says as set per budget, if I remember correctly, in the policy. So we're covered that way as well.
Jen, I know we touched yesterday on the wage review that the county undertook. Through that review, was council and the Reeves remuneration considered through that at all, or was that only pertained to staff?
In administration. I know that a few years back there was some work done. I don't know if I have access to that information. It wasn't me who did it. But we could easily, all of council's salaries and wages are reported in the financial statements, annual financial statements. So I could easily pull some surrounding municipalities and bring back some information based on, it'd be a year old, obviously, but it is all public information, so.
Any thoughts from council on how we'd like to proceed on with this? I know, and maybe Jen, for clarity, so that the Deputy Reeve in the past, was it $10,000 that was allotted for that Deputy Reeve position? Is that correct, or is that incorrect?
I think it was somewhere along that range, only it was split into a per diem rate. So
okay,
I could go back and try to come up with something a bit more concrete, but Just between that last meeting and this one, I thought I would average it out. But I think, it's totally at council's discretion, but I think depending on the, I guess, activities that the deputy reeve would have to take on versus the rest of council's where that consideration was.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know how many other counties or municipalities out there are just doing an annual remuneration for council?
Any of the municipalities that I've worked for, well, one other one, and I'm fairly familiar with a couple MDs, I believe are all monthly or paid bi-weekly to monthly. Not just a one sum at the end of the year.
No, I don't mean that. I mean,
Oh, sorry.
that's an annual remuneration,
Yes, sorry.
right?
That is-
I mean, how it gets paid or, what increments is sort of, is not really relevant to the fact that that's what it is for the year. Is there a possibility that you could research those organizations and see what the difference that they pay between the reeve or the mayor and the deputy mayor, and come back to us with some information so that we're in line with other
Yeah,
municipalities?
we could definitely reach out to, or like I said, I can just go pull some financial statements from neighboring municipalities or like size, yeah.
Mark?
Thank you. I guess my question would just be, from the new guy side of things, is what time commitment does the deputy reeve take? Like, my understanding now is that by having an assigned deputy reeve, there's more of a connection, it's sort of a shadow to the reeve, so if something happens, then that person is ready to roll, and there isn't any holdup. They understand what's happening. So I'm assuming there'd be more time commitment than whether they attend all the meetings with the reeve and the CAO or what that looks like. But I just would get, if we have a clearer definition of what that looks like, and just the terms of reference basically for our deputy reeve, just so that helps in the discussion. So I think that's kind of clouding things a bit. People aren't sure, so.
Dan?
Just for that point, and I'll leave it for, it depends on how it goes, whether the deputy is with the reeve all the time or how we're going to flesh that out. But in the past, before they made the changes to the Municipal Government Act, the deputy reeve and the reeve would always sit down with the CAO to go over the agenda. So I think one of the reasons why in the past there was more of a time commitment was because of that. And when they made the changes to the MGA, then that wasn't necessary. So there was less time commitment on. So I think we just have to keep that in mind when we're looking at the time pressures. That was something that was there before, and I think that was one of the reasons why the deputy had that elevated rate as well, and now that's not a necessity now. However, given that, council may want to, as you said, shadow and look at that as well.
Thanks, Ann. And maybe just from a previous council perspective, maybe to John's comment, so we did have, we went through the process where we, I guess we investigated going to a salaried pay structure for council and reeve. Staff went away, did the research. I believe at the time, and this was some time ago, so looked at comparables, and then I guess like essentially what Jen compiled here, took some averages just to make sure that we were staying within the confines of what our budgeted amounts had been previously. And it did become before council. The initial time, my recollection is that we did not move forward with it. We took some time, went back to the drawing board, brought it back again, and then it did pass. At the time, with the change to the deputy reeve position being a rotating, we decided that it was best to not have a separate pay line for that position. My personal opinion right now is being in this chair, it obviously changes my perception a little bit. I do see value in that deputy reeve position, and I do intend to utilize that position more so maybe in the past, just to help me meet my other commitments away from the county. So I intend to lean on that position, especially seasonally. And having said that, I have no desire to enlarge council's budget by any stretch. So having said that, I would definitely be in support of maybe somehow augmenting that deputy reeve pay position, and in doing so, taking that from the reeve salary. I would be completely in favor of. And I realize that I'm sitting in this chair, so I hope that that carries some sincerity with it. I realize that I won't be in this chair every year. So obviously that would be a council's discretion how they decide to handle that. But that would be something that I would definitely support and be supportive of, just for your thoughts. John?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, and I appreciate that. I was looking more along the lines of just to make sure that I understand the reasoning behind going in an annual remuneration, because it's a cleaner and easier way to take care of this, and it balances it out, and it's much easier to budget, I'm sure. Just from the standpoint of what other municipalities are doing for the pay structure, or the remuneration for the reeve, for the deputy reeve, and use that as a guideline for us to look at and make a decision on, do we want to align with that, or do we want to go and reinvent the wheel and go a different direction with it? So that was my only sort of thought process. Certainly appreciate and understand that when you're in the deputy reeve position, there is going to be an additional workload. How big that workload is may change from year to year depending upon the circumstances. But in order to have that tier, it'd be nice for us to have an understanding of what other municipalities are doing to recognize that.
Thank you, John. Anne?
We can certainly bring that back.
Okay. Then why don't we plan on that then,
Okay.
please?
Yeah, I can prepare something and for the next meeting for sure.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome. So, of course, within that wages and benefits as well, we do incorporate some, and within E2, which we refer to as contract services, I'm just going to go to the summary here because it's a little bit easier. There is also some mileage and subsistence for things like RMA conferences, or the FCM, which is the Federal Canadian Municipalities Conference, that often a few councillors attend, among some other training opportunities that might arise. And those are for anything more or less that is outside of the county boundaries as per the current policy. There's no operating projects budgeted. As I mentioned, we included the strategic planning portion up in as part of E2. That's what that increase is for. Council is also has to pay a service to the IT department because of all the iPads. This council chambers is full of IT equipment, etc. So you did see a bit of a bump in that. As mentioned yesterday, in Doug's Capital with the financial software conversion, there's a bit of an increase this year, and you see it go back down next year as we drop off the one software provider, and then we just kind of looked at the inventory and what's upcoming. We also have some, I guess I'll call them funding requests. So there's a funding for organizations and individuals. So council has a policy where they will, with applications or requests, provide about $500 per request. We have a bursary program that this 2022 would be year 3 of it. Our first year, we didn't get a whole bunch of applications. Our second year, which was this year, I feel was very successful, and it was actually quite interesting going through the applications. And then we also have our annual community hall funding. So council made a resolution a few years ago. We were getting lots of requests, and we used to have what we called a land trust program, which is now municipal reserve. And so they decided to allocate $10,000 annually to each of the community halls and the Prairie Tractor organization within the county. So that's included in the budget again. And then, as mentioned yesterday, when we were going through the impact summary, there's the additional $5,000 annual transfer to reserves to fund the municipal election. So by year 4, that gives about $20,000 budget for the election, which should be sufficient. Moving forward into 2023 and 2024, no revenue required there, with the decrease in the strategic plan just back to the regular annual cost of doing it in-house. We didn't require any funding. We did put in a 1% COLA, and that is basically across the board. You're going to see it for years 2023 and 2024. So that is just to kind of incorporate inflation. It's not a guarantee, obviously, but we thought we should include something in there. And I know union negotiations will be taking place, so that's all up in the air as well. As I mentioned, reduction in the strategic planning costs. Services by other departments, there's that decrease there with the removal of the one financial software type. No operating projects again. And then the funding for E5 and E6 for the funding request and the transfer to reserve stays the same. And 2024 is very, very similar. So you're not seeing a lot of change there in the future years. So that's council's budget.
Anything from council?
Let's go back to this page.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay. So I have on here CAO's budget, and I will apologize because we did at our leadership meeting discuss changing the name of the department to the executive office because it does incorporate CAO, the executive administrator for CAO and council, as well as HR. So we're going to change the name of that moving forward. So the final budget documents will have that change included in them. So just going down to page 74 and 75 of your document, this budget doesn't have a lot of changes within it either. The transfers from reserves is for the Employee and Council Appreciation Night. It's funded from the reserve. Now when I say it's funded from the reserve and we budget for this, we only take from the reserve what we actually spend. So if the event doesn't happen due to COVID, or we've done a few other recognition things related to that without having the gala, for quite a bit less than the actual budget itself, then that's all we will utilize of the reserve. So we're not just depleting the reserve of funds unless we actually use those dollars.
Jen, can you maybe just speak to that that event, the employee recognition event? I know previous to my time on council, there were more events throughout the year for various different recognition events, as you had alluded to. Could you maybe just speak to that event and what it all entails?
Yep. So previously we had, like the chair mentioned, a few events throughout the year and a Christmas party. And we changed that to an employee and council recognition night. So this is where, it's a celebration, I guess, of staff. Long service awards are presented to staff, in a group setting, so everybody can be recognized. Retirees are recognized at that event as well. And it's just kind of an evening, an appreciation evening for everybody. So it's a dinner and some form of entertainment, whether it's games that we've brought in or something else, and then usually a bit of a dance afterwards. So it's just a nice event where staff can be recognized.
When's the last time we had it?
2 years ago. Yeah, so it would have been 2019. Yeah, so we moved it to the fall. It's actually in September, and that way we can incorporate all the seasonals in the event as well. They have an opportunity to attend, where by Christmas lots of them had moved on or were doing different things or maybe working up north, whatever it might have been at the time, so they weren't able to attend.
Anne?
It also incorporates a Christmas party because we found that we didn't have the attendance for the Christmas party. So it's in lieu of, it's staff appreciation, but it's also in place of our Christmas party as well.
Yeah, we just do the luncheon now, which
Thank you.
the union supports for the most part.
Thanks, Jen.
Yep. So contracted services, this was just a minimal increase to align with actual costs, and this is more related to general services within the department. There's costs that just go along with different services that come up, registrations, items like that. So just incorporates that. Services by other departments, so that is to fund the IT and one fleet vehicle. So that the fleet, as we mentioned yesterday, a lot of that's been reduced for administration because of the enterprise program. So that annual fee has gone down, that portion of it anyways. And then again, the operating project, which I spoke to, which is the appreciation gala or night. And then same thing for 2023 and 2024. You won't see a lot of change there outside of just the little bit of COLA for inflation that we included. And then the reduction in 2023 to the IT rates, which kind of you see work its way back up again as the budget, just to ensure that the IT department is self-funded and zero tax support.
Anything from council on that?
Okay, so just for the sake of time, I think we'll kind of bring municipal services back to the next meeting on the 7th, because it is a big department to go through and usually generates a lot of discussion, which I don't think we want to crunch.
Okay.
So if council's in favor with that, I think I'll just move down to finance and administration, which you're probably going to find. Let me just.
And Lauren, just so you're aware, we talked off the top. We're going to go till noon today, and just because of the breadth of material we still have to do, we're going to come back on. It's in our calendars already on the 7th. We have allocated 9:30 till 3, so we're trying to kind of go through some of the smaller bites right now, and then we'll leave the bigger bite for the 7th.
For today. So on page 103, you'll see kind of a summary page for corporate services. So corporate services is assessment, finance and administration is kind of the header, and information technology, which is in bold a little bit below because IT does have its own manager, but it kind of falls within that realm. And a lot of this I was kind of explaining to senior leadership yesterday. A lot of the reason the budget is set up this way is because that's how it rolls into the financial statements, just how everything flows through. So that's why we've kept them this way.
Jen, can you make that any bigger on that
Yes.
screen by chance?
Certainly.
Thank you.
How's
Ann?
that?
And just what we're going to try next year, too, we had a good discussion about it yesterday, just to help everybody relate to the asset management plan, we're going to try and reformulate the document so that you can see the asset projects that we're doing and the life expectancy and where they sit in the asset management plan. We haven't figured out how we're going to do that next year, but we're going to.
So I should have pointed this out on the council and CAO's budget, and I apologize, but just sort of at the bottom of the summaries page, you see the increase and decrease by percent and dollars. And the reason I show both is because a 5% increase to a budget of $3 million is a lot different than a 5% increase to a public operations budget of 10 or more million. So I like percentages sometimes, but in this case, I think it's important to see the dollars as well. And overall, actually, within corporate services, there is a slight decrease to the annual budget. And we'll go through that, and I can explain a few things. So the tax support portion also shows up at the bottom, and you can see assessment and taxation, what portion is tax supported, finance and administration, and then that IT has zero tax support because it's funded through those services by other departments. So we'll start with assessment first, if we're ready to move on to that. So just at the bottom of the assessment, we have assessment and projections, and Les Whitfield, the assessor, provides these to me. And this gives kind of our projections. So when I say this is a tax support after growth, that's the bottom portion here, and these are his estimates on average, what he expects the growth will be either through assessment values or development. So that's just a reminder for all of council. The budget for assessment is fairly simple. All of the sales of goods and services is generated through tax notification fees and tax certificates. So with most property sales, the lawyers ask for a tax certificate to ensure that there is a zero balance on any taxes or any outstanding invoices we might have under that property's name. Salaries, wages, and benefits includes everything, as well as professional development. Contract and general services. So we do have to pay the province an annual fee for the designated industrial properties because they now do the assessment on those and then charge us for it. So we used to do them ourselves, but they took that back. And then services by other departments as well. Now, one addition in here, which I think I've rolled up. Oh, and there's land title fees as well, pardon me. Oh, I think I actually put it under admin. Let me just go back up, sorry. So assessment, we do have a project, but I think I put it in finance. Through discussions with senior leadership, we thought it might be beneficial in the upcoming year to bring on a third party and maybe do an assessment review of the county and just maybe have a outside purview of and review of our assessed values and make sure that we are they are in line. Now the province does review, and I know that Les has had audits with the province in the past, and they just basically look, but they have their standard, and I believe you have to be in, I think it's 5% give on either side of what you've provided them. So they do take a look at that, but this would be more of a, I think a bigger review, because I think they focus on certain areas annually when the province is looking, whether it's commercial or farmland. Well, they probably don't look at that much since it's frozen, but residential, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, do you also mean like the assets that you have, like the bridges, the roads, the whole works, or?
No, it would just be strictly assessment. So it would be the assessed value of county properties for tax purposes. Yeah, so we would just be looking at land and development assessments.
Anne?
Thank you. I think it would just be prudent to do it and give us some kind of level of comfort. We have an internal assessment person, and that's great, but I think having an outside third party review everything, it would give us the ability to make sure that we were in line and that we weren't losing any revenue on assessment, use, etc. So that's the reasoning behind that, and I don't believe it's been done
Not
ever.
in my time.
Yes.
Maybe previous, but I've been here 8 years and it hasn't been done.
And through 8,000 properties, obviously, every once in a while, we come across one that isn't assessed right, whether it's use, whether there's additional buildings or whatever. So this would just be ideal so that we could ensure that we are not losing any revenue through assessment.
Claus?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. But the only thing is, we all know that the assessment value is probably higher than that we're doing right now. So we are probably going to get a little bit of feedback from our taxpayers with this, probably. How do we want to go about that?
Well, and maybe
Okay.
if I can just comment to that, I did have a few discussions at RMA and actually one of our a municipality in relatively close proximity to us, I'll say, did go down a similar path, have an external assessor come in and do a review as has been suggested. And I think as Claus alluded, there was obviously some very large discrepancies in some assessments. So I think that is maybe to an extent we cross that bridge when we get there, but I think that is something a discussion that will have to be had, how you then grapple with that, because obviously we still have to be fair and equitable, but we have to be reasonable at the same time too. I know some of the increases that they were seeing on properties were very, very substantial and obviously hit some bottom lines very hard. So just maybe some anecdotal evidence from some other municipalities. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of doing this, having this external company come in, are you talking about having them review all of the properties? Or-
Ideally, that's what we'd like. It's not even just assessment values. It's just to ensure that they're being, their use, like Anne mentioned, is assessed properly as well. So, maybe it's assessed as a portion of farmland that's been subdivided and missed. I don't think that's happening because I know Hillary shares all of that information with the assessor, but that's just a quick example off the top of my head. Another reason to do it is I know we likely will face some inequities in the assessments there. Assessment is based on market value, a year behind generally market value. So maybe we will see, being what the market has been for the past year. I think that bubble is probably going to burst before too long, but it will be based on current market value or previous year's market value up to December 31st. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would that also include farmland? Because the farmland is basically is assessed provincially right now, is that correct?
Well, they have it frozen.
Yeah.
They have the assessment values frozen on farmland, but I don't think it would hurt to review the uses. You know, like I said, there could be some subdivisions that have taken place. There could maybe be some pivots that were added, so it's not dry land anymore. It's now irrigated, as a couple examples.
Because I think I seen yesterday too, it's assessed at about 45,000 a quarter, by the looks of it.
Yeah, I think that was dry land sample.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one of our challenges is remaining sustainable as an organization, and our largest revenue stream is property taxes. So the reason why we want to look at this is if we're missing any type of revenue, but not only the revenue, it's to make sure we're as accurate as possible. It'll help us in all kinds of areas. It'll help us with the lobbying the government. If we say, okay, farmland's been frozen since this much, we have this many dollars tied up in that assessment. And right now, yes, we do know that, but the reason behind this was to make sure the accuracy is there, I believe.
John?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking through the budget to try to find what that estimated cost is.
Yeah, I believe, sorry, I think I put it under finance, and I have 35,000 as my estimate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and funded from MSI operating grant funding. Sorry, I thought I had it in the assessor's budget, but I did put it down to administration, because it
So-
has an impact there too.
And just to follow up on that, so we're talking $35,000 to do an assessment on 8,000 properties?
Yeah, which is about 2 billion in assessment.
Yeah. No, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if that's realistic from bringing in an independent party to do all 8,000 properties at that cost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once they get looking at it more closely, I mean, it was really rough estimate, right? They haven't seen our role. They haven't seen all of our uses. Yeah, yeah. So,
Thank you. And I do obviously, I see all the points of view and do see the value. And I guess moving forward, the further that you would put this off, if you are maybe a bit behind, I think it just, you run the risk of widening that gap the further you go out. So I definitely see why you would bring this forward. So thank you.
you know, and in fairness to the assessor, it is one person and with the add of the business tax as well. You know, and I don't want to say his focus, but he spends a lot of time on the new development, which, I mean, through Hillary's reports, you've seen has been building permits and development. Anytime there's an improvement, a new shop goes up, that's something else that he has to include as well. So that's a lot already on the plate. So I think just to review and ensure we're still in line with where we should be.
Lauren and then John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that would mean they would actually reassess each property, or would they just do comparisons? Like, would they do so many and do a comparison, or how does that work?
I guess we'd have to work out those details. I don't think they would go to each individual property myself. I think they would probably look through and be like, okay, we know this is farmland. They would look at our records. They probably would determine, I would hope that within the hamlets and looking at development in the past, I don't know, 5 years or something, make sure everything's been captured, that kind of thing would happen. But I don't know for certain. I haven't seen a contract or anything.
So just two follow-ups. And so then, like, because we only do assessments on a 4-year kind of rotation, isn't it? Does that have much of an implication on something they would do? Like, because you don't reassess all, like, houses every year.
Well, no. Les does do a market analysis and then applies that across the board, I believe, and then looks at, as I mentioned, everything that comes through development. I don't know if it's a 4-year rotation, though. I'd have to double check with him. Yeah, I thought it was too.
And one final. So would they also look at the business tax, like to see how, like, if I say I have 25,000 head, would they actually maybe go out there and say, you know, what is your capacity? Like, how?
I didn't incorporate that because we are using the licensing,
NRCB?
and we just have that handful that come back every year and say they're not utilizing the full capacity. And I don't think there's many that want to go have less. I mean, I think if they are using less, they're wanting to pay it, but I don't think they're going to want to go back and say, you know, this isn't our licensing number. But it is an option we could add on.
We didn't include it
No, no.
I've got John and then Claus, but maybe just if I could jump in quick. Obviously, you know, this is something that administration sees value in. You've added it as a budget item. I don't want to get too off track in the scope of this. Is there an opportunity maybe that we touch on the scope at a future date?
Yes.
Is there any, what would
Yeah.
you advise?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. John, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, just sort of going back to the cost. I see value in this because there is something that when you're doing tax assessments and you're doing market value assessments, there is a certain amount of subjectivity to it. So you can, if you know, if you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again, there are things that you can miss. My concern with it is when we're looking at the cost of it, I think that we need to maybe take a look at that a little bit harder, because at $35,000 to do an assessment for 8,000 properties, it works out to $4 per property. And my concern then comes into, that seems like a pretty low number for what we're expecting for services. So that then just brings me into the, you know, if we go down this road and we jump down this rabbit hole, I'm concerned that those costs greatly and very quickly escalate, and then it becomes something that is not economic to do. So that's something I think we should take a pretty serious look at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can definitely go back to that. And just, I think part of that is just because of the farmland. I mean, there's limitations there on what that assessment can be with the provincial legislation. So
And-
those are pretty quick and easy ones, I think,
And generally, too, how it works is that council says we want to look at the assessments and gives us the parameters, and then we as staff would work on knowing your intent of what you wanted to do, then we would set that through the RFP process and all that. We just need to know, is this something that council wants to do, and what are the parameters of what you see us doing? Okay, but we can certainly park that for now. We've put it up
Yep.
here.
Okay, thank you. Claus, did you have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we do this, I was gonna go into the other details that we're not going there, but if we do this, we're gonna spend $35,000 doing that. If we're not gonna follow through on it, it doesn't make any sense to do it. You know what I mean? That if we're looking at the different property taxes and the hikes that are necessary, then that's the danger of doing it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. I just was going to note too that through 2023 and 2024 of the assessor's budget, not a lot of changes, a little bit of inflation in E2. That budget or those salaries and wages within the department are currently frozen, so no change there. And then a little bit of a change to the services by other departments, as we discussed in previous budgets. So I'll just take you down now to finance and administration. So this budget also incorporates the return on investments funding that we receive, as well as penalties and a few other items. So, you know, it is a rather large budget, but you can see up here there's fines and penalties, return on investments that are included, and then the transfers to reserves. 325,000 of that 405 is the return on investments that goes back to the capital reserves. So just get that. And then here is our grants. It says 65,000, 35,000 is mentioned for the property assessment review. And the other 30,000 is for the intern. We talked about a municipal intern yesterday and getting one for municipal affairs. So they would fund about, I averaged it over a 2-year period, even though it's about 18 months, 50-50, because it runs from April of each year, or the first year around April or May. So that's what that additional 30,000 is, the municipal affairs funding for an intern. And then the intern costs have been included under the salaries, wages, and benefits as well. Contracted and general services, I'm just going to go down here to help me out a little bit, or I'll finish going through the revenues. So I mentioned municipal intern program and then the property assessment review. R2 is revenues received from, so we have the building lease, so AFSC who rents upstairs pays an annual lease. I'm on page 109. 109? Yeah. And then, tax notification fee. So that's all tax certificates and assessment, and then some penalties like for accounts receivable. We get revenues for NSF fees and other administrative charges from other organizations as we need to charge things out would come back in that kind of R3, which is other revenues. R4 is penalties received on outstanding tax levy balances. Of course, year to year this changes. We do have a very good tax collection rate on average. By December 31st, we're usually very close to about anywhere between 96 and 98% of tax recovery, which is really good. It's quite high. And in fact, I should mention at the last meeting, we brought forward the tax sale, and all the properties have paid, so the tax sale has been canceled. So that's a bonus as well. And they pay all the penalties and costs related to preparing that tax sale. The return on investment earnings, as I mentioned, all of these earnings are transferred to the capital reserves. We put the $325,000 in there. It has been higher in years. Rates are down right now. I didn't make a lot of changes to that. It is more or less an in and out, so we just want to have it identified. And then transfers from reserves to offset potential write-offs. So we do put a little bit, it's a $15,000 budget in there for, maybe some AR accounts that we've sent to collections, and we have a portion of that the collections people keep that we have to write off, but at least we've captured something rather than nothing. So those would be what that little offset of potential write-offs would be, just to ensure that we're not putting ourselves out by people not paying their bills. Under the expenses, we've got, of course, salaries, wages, and benefits with the 1.5% COLA. This includes professional development as well. There are a couple staff within this department, too, that are red circled, so it doesn't generally apply across the board, but it is applied where it needs to be. And then again, the municipal intern wage is captured in E1 for 2022, and you'll see it again in 2023. We did have a slight reduction to our contract and general services, and this is mainly for legal costs. That budget was up a few years ago, and we have brought it down, but during the business tax process, that budget got quite big. We reduced it, so we felt comfortable reducing it more based on the last couple years' averages. And then insurance premiums was increased in that budget line. So you kind of see ebbs and flows within the same object or function, but try to give a bit of an explanation there. E3, material supplies, utilities are included in there, so power and gas for this building, other materials as required. The administrative budget kind of captures all of the kitchen supplies, janitorial supplies, and everything else that is offered within this facility. And there are services by other departments. So this was increased and updated with the IT equipment inventory review and the requirements, as well as we took the brunt of the financial software. I mean, we did spread it out because it is utilized by all departments, but we did take a brunt of that increase in this year while we kind of run both simultaneously. And then there's a small portion of the fleet because there is a admin vehicle that's shared between just general administration, planning and development, and assessment. So kind of split that cost between the three. For operating projects, as mentioned, we have the assessment overview in there. And then our annual transfers to reserve. So we do an annual transfer to reserve of $80,000 for this building. So that helps pay for some of the upgrades that were presented in the capital budget yesterday, as well as other things that, come up that need to get done that are maybe outside of our general budget from year to year. I should mention too that under that E2 budget, there is a building maintenance budget built into that as well, just for a leaky toilet or squeaky door or something like that needs to get done. And that's more or less the 2022 budget. So just as above, there was a slight decrease just based on everything we were looking at. And I believe I mentioned it on day one that each of us, bearing in mind that inflation is rather high across the country this year, the COVID pandemic is still alive and well, shall we say, that, you know, we just really tightened up things where we could, and you know, it is a budget, it's an estimate, we're doing our best based on averages, true costs as we see them, projections and predictions of things coming forward, but each of us did take a hard look at those things and try to do our best where we could. In the upcoming years, again, you'll see the intern in 2023. Those, I've split it evenly, as I mentioned. You might see it fluctuate a bit more from one year to the next, but it'll be offset by that grant funding anyways. However, they work out the schedule. And then the operating projects, there's no operating projects for 2023 or 2024. Small 1% kind of COLA or inflationary increase. Did I put 1% in? Yeah, I did. Oh, and includes municipal intern. And not a lot of changes outside of that, other than the services by other departments. We just adjusted the IT portion as mentioned. So, and other inflation. So I don't know if there's any questions on finance and administration budget.
Anything
Or-
from council?
I was just going to give maybe a brief with the municipal intern program. We didn't really touch on it too much, but it is through municipal affairs, and it, I guess, offers people who are interested in joining municipal government or working within municipal government a chance to get their feet wet and really decide if that's a path they want to take. And I think having the funding through municipal affairs helps. And then you have to provide work plans. There's different areas like finance, planning and development. What's the other one?
Finance and planning and development,
Public Works. There's a couple different streams. We're going to go for a finance administrative one. Timing is good, I think, with a few of the projects within the department. We have records management going on in IT. We have the financial software conversion. There's lots of different things that we could get them working on. They also have to spend time in each of the other departments, a percentage of their time, and they also have to be, I think they have to attend a couple conferences or training opportunities as part of that as well. So, and the municipality only has to come up with a small percentage of their salary.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm personally familiar with the program. I know it would have been 14, 15 years ago now. I did apply myself on the planning and development stream. So I know it was within our faculty. It was something that was sought after, and I think it's really neat that administration has pursued this. I think it's a great opportunity for both the individual that's selected and for the municipality. So thank you.
Thanks. So
Lauren? Sorry, Jen. Lauren?
Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, you, and I see it in all of them, but R6, transfer from reserves to offset potential write-offs,
Yes.
but I don't see anything in expenses to match that.
It just shows up. It's under, I believe, just E3. It's just a line item, but we do bring funds in to do that. So we bring funds in from the tax equalization reserve should we need them. And it's just to offset those few write-offs that we might have, like I mentioned, through collections.
Right.
We try to send everything to collections first. And generally, actually, this company we've been with lately, and Matthew is quite on top of it, has been quite successful in obtaining. We do have these ones that come forward to council every now and then that make requests, but if they don't pay us in full, the collections people are generally contacting them because they do get a date. So, but it just falls in with, sorry, Lauren, I can't remember if it's E2 or E3, but it's just a line item in there, and it's for the exact same amount. So it's $15,000, and it goes one way or the other. So if we write off, we haven't had to write off $15,000 in a long time. So.
Lauren?
So just to follow up to that, so when you send it to a collection agency,
Mhm.
do you lose a quarter,
Yeah, I
40%?
think they take 40%, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it is a big chunk, but we were getting a lot less than that, and we were really struggling before.
They have methods to collect,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and it does, will show up on their,
I like that term.
yeah, it will show up on their report, their financial.
Right.
I can't think of the name of it right now. Credit.
Very, very persuasive.
Yeah, I think that threat of it affecting their credit rating often gets some payments happening, because I think they have a window to pay us the full amount before they intervene, and then that's when it will go on their credit rating. So I am going to invite Doug up for information technology.
Jen,
Oh,
maybe if we have a natural break here, maybe
Sure.
we'll just take 5 then.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, as mentioned, this is information technology or the IT budget, and you'll see that it has zero tax support because of the services that are received from other departments that help fund the department. And in 2022, which Doug will give more detail on, there's a couple grants that we're receiving. I probably should have put that one down there, but I didn't. So we'll just go to page 114.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of council. This budget, as Jennifer mentioned, will reflect the financial software conversion project, as we will be running two pieces of finance for 2022, as well as the records management scanning project. You'll see the decreases in 2023 and 24, specifically under E2, with the decrease in the software portion of it. Moving on to 2022 for revenues, we start with R1, the grants. We have the MSI operating grant. $30,000 is slated to the records management scanning project, and $90,000 to offset the financial software conversion project. R2, the revenues received, that's the revenues received from the other departments that utilize the IT equipment, and that's used for the cost recovery and replacement of the IT. R3 is the annual transfer of reserve to offset the costs of computer equipment and supplies as it's budgeted. The expenses, E1, shows COLA at 1.5%, applying to the salaries, wages, and benefits. E2, there's an increase, of course, with the contracted general services for the data processing software. Again, this relates to the financial software project. Again, as we'll be running two different pieces of software in 2022. E3 is an inflationary increase for computer equipment and supplies. That's funded from the IT reserve. E4 is my IT department costs to run IT equipment. E5 is our records management document scanning project. What this involves is, in the vault we have approximately 25 to 30 filing cabinets. They're full of land files. And we have an organization who specializes in scanning for municipal governments. They have an accuracy of 99%. We will probably be getting a summer student as well, because we have numerous other documents to scan. In particular, we want these land files to be scanned accurately. Scanning is a boring, tedious task for an individual. We want to make sure the information is captured correctly, saved appropriately. And so that reflects E5. And E6 is the annual transfer to reserved to fund the IT resources. That rounds out 2022. 2023, 2024 are very closely associated with each other. Unfortunately, at this time, there is no grants scheduled for R1. R2, again, is the revenue received from the other departments that utilize the IT resources. R3 is the annual transfer from reserve to offset the costs for the IT supplies. Expenses for E1 for both years reflects the COLA of 1%. E2, again, we start to show the decrease in the software costs. So we'll be down to the new financial system starting in 2023. E3 is the inflationary costs for the IT equipment and supplies, again funded from the IT reserve. E4 is my inflationary increase for the IT department for the IT costs. And again, at this time for E5, there's no operating projects that are scheduled for both years. And E6 is the annual transfer to reserve based on the equipment rentals and supplies.
Can I just add something?
Of course.
Doug can speak to this as well, but with this new financial software, something we didn't touch on for the new council's benefit, but I believe we spoke to it last year, was that over a 5-year period, we should see savings with the new software of what the cost of 1 year with the existing software is. So currently we're paying about $140,000 annually for just the software hosting of this financial software. That'll be reduced significantly. Do you remember what the annual fee is?
The new annual fee is roughly $40,000 to $50,000 per year. The $140,000 obviously occupies a lot of my software budget, as is it's difficult to move forward with other projects, so this will help alleviate that as well.
And the software provider we did pick through an EFP process, and they have converted from our existing software to theirs, I believe.
They have done a number of
Yeah.
municipalities in this province, let alone across the country. They are very well experienced with doing this.
Yeah. So that savings, I think, is just they're more in line and more competitive than the existing. In fact, our existing software company didn't even put forward an RFP and try to retain our business, and then we're shocked when we sent them a letter. So, but through the years, as far as, I mean, IT is always evolving, costs are always going up, needs change with IT, but we should be seeing some savings within that software budget as we move along.
Sorry.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. So your first year with the getting out of Bellamy is 2022? Or you're still in Bellamy in 2022?
That's correct, we are.
For part of the year, yeah, we have to run them simultaneously until we're comfortable with going live and dropping everything off, because we have to transfer all of the information over. So as a starting point, I'm currently working on developing our chart of accounts, how it flows, how it reports, how it will flow out to our financial statements. That's just a starting point, and then we have to incorporate the costing and the budget and all the other pieces that go into it, the payroll. It's fairly extensive bit of work.
So then for the 2022 year, you're paying both companies?
That's
Okay.
correct,
Yes,
yes.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just another piece of inflationary costs. We're similar to fleet, if you will. A lot of the computer components comprise of computer chips, even our security key fobs. There is a waiting list for that, and it's endless. We've ordered different pieces throughout this year, and we're still waiting for them. So again, with COVID, supply and demand has affected all areas.
Any questions or discussion from council? Thanks, Doug.
We're good, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to move down to community services. We'll have Larry come up. So again, you'll see on page 118 of your document, community services 118. Community services encompasses what we call community services administration, economic development, planning and development, and then we did split out the CPO and fire and emergency services program. And the reason for that, as we'll get into once we hit the emergency services portion of the budget, is kind of twofold. One being there's a fire services coordinator contract currently that expires at the end of December. So this budget has a request in it to bring that individual on as a full-time employee, as well as with the new emergency services agreements that are in place. There's quite a bit of changes there, and we're proposing some fee changes to accommodate that as well. Do you have anything to add to?
No, I think you've covered it there.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll just start with the community services administrative budget. There is a bit of an increase here, and that is primarily due to the recreation funding portion of the budget. So I will just, do you want to go through on page 121, Larry?
Sure, thanks.
Morning,
Thank you,
Larry.
Mr. Chairman. Good morning, council. So as far as revenues go, as you can see, transfer from recreation and municipal funds reserved to offset a portion of the annual recreation funding requirement as per the agreements. That's the, I think this year, $100,000 increase that we have no, the county's obligated to pay, and that was a result of the arbitration decision. So that increase was granted, and we have to live with it, so.
We just have a portion of it funded, though.
Okay.
So just for discussion, in 2021, we funded about 125,000, or that's what we had budgeted to fund of the recreation portion. I just left it at the increase based on the previous years, which I think was a 2.5% or 1.5, pardon me, percent. And that was, as Larry mentioned, coming from a combination of the two reserve funds. Now, I guess it's up to council, or maybe you want to decide if you want to continue to fund that from reserves. We're not really putting money back into the recreation reserve specifically, and the municipal reserve would apply because it is a recreation type funding. So I guess that's a decision and discussion for council of, do you want to keep this in? Do you want it to kind of fall off after so many years and become part of tax support? We do currently, based on the recreation agreements, they do expire at the end of 2025. So that's our last committed year, but I imagine there'll be some sort of renewal of those agreements.
Into 24.
Or pardon me, is it 24?
Pretty sure.
Okay. So just something to keep in mind. So the full portion of the recreation funding is not covered by reserve, just a portion of it at this time.
And maybe just for the benefit of the new counselors, I don't know how in depth we've touched on this. So obviously, from the provincial government, it was mandated that we had to go through the process of establishing ICFs, intermunicipal collaboration frameworks, with our urban neighbors. So that included the city, Coaldale, Pitcher Butte, Nobleford, Barons, Colehurst.
And all of our,
As well as our rural
anything that touches our boundaries.
as
basically.
well as the ones outside of that. So obviously those ones that were touching the MD of Tabor, County of Warner, those were a lot more straightforward. Obviously, with our urban partners, we had to go through and make sure that we already had existing agreements pertaining to fire and emergency services, but we went through that process again as well. A big part of that was going through and establishing recreation agreements. The county had previously been in agreements over the years to provide rec dollars. That had gone away. There had been, as Jen had spoke to earlier, there were some grants in between, a community grant that went to some of that. Through the ICF process, we came to an agreement with the urbans to provide them some funding for recreation. One of those urbans put forward the request to go to arbitration. We went through that process with them, and that's what Jen and Larry are speaking to. That number that we had budgeted obviously was impacted by that. So just a little bit of background there, and if admin wants to add anything to that, just a 3,000-foot look.
Just one addition to that. That was a really good synopsis, but the 5 areas that were covered under the municipal community framework, ICF, what? Yeah, recreation, fire, emergency services and fire, transportation, water and wastewater, and
Solid waste, I believe.
solid
is the other
waste, yes. So those were the areas that were covered.
Obviously, some of those were a lot easier to arrive at an agreement on. We had either had a previous agreement, or we were able to come to that much more quickly. And then the more contentious, I guess we could say, was on the rec and the fire. Thank you.
Good, well, thank you. So just looking down at expenses, E1, it's identical to everything else you've seen with the other presentations with respect to operations go, as far as they go. E2, no changes there, just ever so minor, slight adjustment for, I think, increased mobility fees. E3, no changes there. E4, increase to services by other departments. Again, IT, just costs go up there, I think a little bit typically every year. E5, grants to individuals and other organizations, Alberta Summer Games, $4,500. I don't think for the past 2 years, though, that has occurred, so we haven't actually been spending that money, but it's allocated there, and maybe with a little luck in 2022, there will be some summer games in southern Alberta. The Chinook Arch Regional Library Services, that one as well, I don't believe is optional, correct, Jennifer?
No.
We're obligated through provincial legislation and mandate to pay that, so.
Well, pardon me. We
Yeah.
have an
We have an
with
agreement.
them. Yeah, so we're obligated to pay it this time.
Right, and the Barons, Eureka Warner, FCSS Family Community Support Services, that
Is
as well is
listed.
an absolute obligation. It's just an amount of money that we, simply have to pay to support that service to county citizens and people in the rural areas and small areas outside of the city of Lethbridge. E6, no operating projects identified for 2022. And annual recreation funding, there you'll see it, requirement as per agreements on arbitration decision. Sorry, earlier I think I said $100,000 increase this year, $50,000 increase in fact.
As long as I have that right.
Just
It is
a note,
100,000. I have a typo.
It was
You were
100, I'm
right.
sorry. I did
So I'll
have-
make a note.
Thanks.
Jen, you had mentioned the, or maybe it was Larry, regarding the funding for the recreation and the reserve in that. Maybe, I think that probably deserves a bit of a bigger discussion. Maybe we could parking lot that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing under E6, I think it's E6. Oh, no. You talked about, it's E5, I guess.
Okay.
What about Green Acres? Is that considered underneath that one, or is that different? Because that's, we have to pay them too.
Yeah, I think maybe Jennifer can respond to that because it's, definitely not in the community services budget.
No, it's a tax requisition, same as the school board.
Oh, okay.
So it comes through tax revenue.
Okay.
Okay, where were we now? 2023? Again, that R1 amount is just showing what council has previously allocated. I think it was 125,000 going up by 1.5% each year toward the, now what are we at, $300,000 or $350,000 amount that we must pay annually. Well, not annually, but this year at increasing by $50,000 each year up to 2024, hitting a grand total of, is it
400,
400 even? It's not 450, 400.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, I think so.
250,
300,000 this year,
350, yeah.
350, 2023, 400,000 in 2024. So just quickly to that parking lot matter, the 126,000, whatever it is, that is the amount that council has allocated. The difference now is, I guess, where, maybe further discussion will occur how that wants to be funded moving forward. Expenses.
Oh, sorry, Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with that rec funding that we were talking about, that before we got this agreement done with all the urbans, do you know exactly how much in total we gave to, well, it's probably called different then, but to the older rec funding?
Lauren's probably going to say the same thing as me.
Well, you go ahead.
I know that we did in the budget, I think it was in 2018 we removed, is that, or even previous to that maybe. There was an annual budget amount for funding for the urbans. And we had a bit of a, I think it was only $150,000.
100,000.
Or 100,000, and it was split between them at the time. And then we moved it from the budget, and they just sort of applied through the land trust grant at that time for various things related to recreation or community type things. But that was the last time there was actually anything in place.
Anna?
There was a report too that we did do, and if the new members of council want to see it, just to show the amount of money that the county has contributed to the various smaller urbans, and that might give you a better idea. Not necessarily yearly stipulated funding, but the various things that they've come forward and requested, so I'll make sure that you get a copy of that.
See, and that's the amount that I wanted, actually, the answer that I want, with the 100,000 that we had, see where we were at compared to what we're doing now. So.
Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to add one thing to the parking lot. I think we should have a discussion on, after talking at the RMA with a couple of municipalities, they actually have a partial mill rate they put on for recreation / policing costs onto their, so something you might want to have a discussion on. Thanks.
So, Councillor Hickey, is that sort of similar, would that be on the tax bill as same as policing, so that the public would know?
Yes,
Is
policing
that-
and recreation.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there'd be tax item
So
lines.
now, the government is not very happy that you put policing on there, but some people have done it, so.
We as the county do have the policing separated out on our tax notice, and I do know that when we were speaking with municipal affairs, they said it wasn't necessary. You don't need to do that, but I think it's important because it's a big chunk of the
Yeah.
budget.
Thank you.
Good, okay. Did we, I think, more or less get through 2023? Again, no significant changes there. Pretty much a mirror of 2022 right through with respect to revenues and expenses as we have them projected at this
Minor
time.
increases,
Yeah, the minor increases noted, right? Great. And 2024, again, just looking quickly, very almost identical. Slight increases. You'll see, for example, oh no, we don't even have an annual increase for FCSS, but I think it does go up annually each year.
I didn't incorporate anything because I only had costs built out to 2023, so I expect we'll receive some kind of notice from them with their updated increases.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that whole budget, recreation aside, is quite stable, quite predictable, quite, year after year, almost identical. Where you'll see some changes are in the next two departments, planning and development a little bit, but most significantly in the area of emergency services and the peace officer program. That's coming up here.
So here's planning on page 124. Do you just want me to go down to do you want to speak to anything here, or just want to go down?
The one thing I just point out, you'll see on R1, an increase, fairly significant increase in the sale of goods and services. And I think that is largely and almost exclusively a reflection of the fact that we have so many development permits coming through these days. Record numbers. We're in a record-setting year this year. And of course, with each development permit, there's a fee. So those fees have been
And buildings.
projected and anticipated to increase.
And building permits are built into there
Oh,
too.
building permits as well, right, because we do receive 30% of the revenue from Park Enterprises through our contract with them, through the building permits, and that's been a real benefit to Lethbridge County for sure, since we've participated in that program.
Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when you talked about Park Enterprises, do you get 30% of every permit they issue, like for electrical and all plumbing and gas? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we see a requisition or a copy of what they're submitting to the county every month, and it's significant. Yeah.
It's definitely made a difference to that revenue since partnering with them.
Klaus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we've discussed this before. The Park Enterprise, that Park Enterprise hired to do the job, that the developer has to pay for that, is that correct?
Correct.
And then we get the 30%
Correct.
from that.
And I think just kind of philosophically, you could probably figure it out or see that it makes sense in the sense that prior to that, developers had the option of going to any other business that was out there that provided that service and was authorized to do so through the province. So it was, sort of buyer beware and shop around for what they felt was the best deal. Now, because developers in the county are obligated to go to the one authorized provider, service provider, Park Enterprises, obviously that means more business for Park. The benefit, is obvious to them, but for that, the cost is that the county receives a good portion of that revenue, again, at 30%. Hence, that's kind of go hand in hand, higher number of development permits. Typically, there'll be higher revenue received and a higher number of building permits and electrical, gas, plumbing, and so on, as Councillor Hickey mentioned, goes with that, so.
I was just going to mention, so in this department for 2022, you are seeing a decrease. A lot of that has to do with the additional revenues that we've built in. And then also under E4 operating projects, that kind of ebbs and flows. And depending on what Hillary's got going, try to keep a, an annual allocation in there for different projects and studies that do come up throughout the year of 5,000. And then she has some more specific items that have been identified.
And I think she touched on those in the planning workshop with council. One of them that comes to mind is a review, 5-year review of the city intermunicipal development plan. So that's due in 2022.
And
Colehurst and Coaldale?
No, Coaldale.
Coaldale, sorry, yeah, as well. Thanks, Ann. Yeah. Okay, so looking at 2022, I think we probably just touched on much of that or most of that. The revenues, again, the reasons for the significant increase there just described through the revenue generated from development and building type permits. Expenses, E1, again, standard throughout the presentations today. E2, slight decrease in contracted planning services to adjust for subdivision development appeal board costs. That's the, what is it called if I can get it right? CISDAB, Chinook Intermunicipal Subdivision Development Appeal Board, CISDAB, I think. So our costs seem to have come down a little bit by joining that program, participating in that program. E3, increase to services, offset IT and fleet services costs. Fleet, I think
It's just minor.
just very, very minor,
A
yeah.
portion of the admin building. That's
You're right,
split.
because there's no dedicated planning department vehicle or anything like that, so. E4, operating projects, again, just touched on in industrial commercial land use strategy and a review of a couple of the larger intermunicipal development plans the county has with our neighbors. 2023, again, identical number there that we had. Expenses, E1, same again. E2, increased for planning services through ORSC at an inflationary rate, so a slight increase there. E3, slight increase, again, through the services provided by information technology and fleet services costs. 2023, operating projects, again, to be determined, really, planning projects that will be looked at in 2023. 2024.
I just have a typo there.
Do we? Oh, yes. 2024, again, the revenues, same. I think we have a one here as well, Jen.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple minor typos. We'll clean up for the final document that comes council's way. Expenses, again, in E1, slight adjustments over an annual period, year to year. Increase, again, same as the year before for slight increase in ORSC fees. E3, no increases projected. Thanks, Doug, for not increasing the cost too much, maybe for 1 year at least. Keep that.
24 is quite far out.
Quite, yeah.
Really, don't get too excited.
Being a little too, trying to look on the glasses half full, the rosy side of the equation, let's say. And as well, a little ways out, 3 years out, for E4 operating projects to be determined. Planning and development projects include a review of the land use bylaw. That would be a kind of a 10-year comprehensive view. It was indeed 2013 when the land use bylaw received a full upgrade and revamp. And it was just before my time, and I began at the county in early 2014. So it came in right, I remember that, I think it was adopted in October of 2013. So we'll definitely be at that 10-year mark at that point. And then a review of some of the Hamlet studies that were done sooner out of the gate than, for example, the Fairview one, which was just completed earlier this year. So that is the Planning and Development Department. Don't know if there's any further discussion or observations on that.
Klaus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have, not officially yet, but there's some questions being were had about ORSC, like doing it in-house or not. Do we want to put that on the parking lot, or do we want to have a separate discussion about that some other time?
Ann?
We need to have a separate discussion about that some other time because we have to do a business case study and we'll have to do that internally and administratively.
Anything further from council?
Okay. So in emergency services, we did on the summary for community services show the CPO program and the fire services program separately. Here you're seeing it more by the actual expense costs. I'm just going to jump ahead here a little bit for Larry, but what you'll see is a significant increase to the revenues, R2. Now that budgeted line is based on some fees that we want to bring forward to council to update the fire fee schedule to align with the new fire services agreement. The new fire services, well, I'll go backwards. Previously, when we paid the urbans for fire services, it was more on a lump sum annually that was paid to them quarterly, and it was based on a percentage of their fire operations. Now, it's a more or less a fee for service, so we're obligated to, as per the agreement, we pay them $2,000 a month for.
Jen, can I just stop you for 1 sec?
Yep.
Maybe just take a step back, and maybe Larry or Ann, or Jen for that matter, but maybe just speak to those agreements a little bit, and maybe where we're at on that, and maybe just for, especially for the new councillors, we are going to have a fire provision workshop that will dive into that at a really deep level, but maybe just a 3,000-foot view of that right now.
Okay, I can do that. So previously, we had agreements with the smaller urbans that provide fire services in the county and the city as well. Through the ICF process, we renegotiated those agreements. We renegotiated it for a 3-year period, and it was challenging. But however, the agreements are better than the previous agreements, but there's a lot of changes in the way the costing is, so that we're working through these 3-year agreements with the caveat knowing that we have to move forward and we have to probably renegotiate, Larry, within the next year or so, correct?
Right, because we're pretty
Almost
much 1
a year
year
away.
into the 3-year agreement.
But there's a lot of moving pieces with fire that we will have to talk to council about, and how do we want to continue fire provision in a cost-effective manner. But in the meantime, the new agreements before the previous agreements have changed a lot of the way that the urbans are paid and the funding mechanism as well.
Thank you, Ann. Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's a fairly significant increase in revenue, coupled with the fact now that insurance companies are increasing the rates for, time. If you're 15 minutes and beyond, your rate has gone up significantly for your new insurance policies. So we're increasing our charge-out calls to people who really are paying huge premiums now for a service they really can't get. So if they're called out there, you're going to increase their billing by quite a bit, plus they're paying, in some cases, double or more for their fire insurance protection. I'm just thinking that we really need to think about this before you consider putting that in.
You can go ahead.
One thought, if I may, Mr. Chairman, through you to Councillor Hickey. On December 16th, council meeting, we'll be bringing forth an updated and revised fees and charges bylaw, and the changes that we're proposing or giving forward to council to consider will be in there. And appreciate your comment, and fair enough. One of the things, we'll give some concrete examples as well, but this past summer, there was a large hay shed fire at a big operation. The cost for the response, the actual cost was right around $60,000. The county subsidized, if you want to call it that, or covered the cost of 90% of that. Based on the current fees and charges bylaw for fire response, the county was only able to recover about $6,000 of that, about 10% of the cost. So that's the type of incident that we're asking council just to have a look at. I can't remember, or I'm not sure exactly how we have it set up in the fees and charges bylaw that we're bringing forward, Jennifer, but I think we're looking at it a little bit differently for residences and small entities, let's say, versus large commercial operations, right? And one of the things we're proposing, I think we have it as 60 minutes.
I can't remember if it was 60 or
60 or
2 hour.
90.
Yeah.
We talked about it, but for example, say a residential incident, whatever it is, and the fire department's called out, most of them end up being less than an hour or 90 minutes, a little bit of travel time. They get there, it's something small, a small fire, a medical situation, whatever, thought of, gas leak, something like that, where the fire department is called as the rescue unit, not always fighting fires, we all know that, that's for sure. But we're proposing that maybe they would have either a 60 or a 90-minute free call. That first 60 or 90 minutes would actually be no charge. So it would end up being just a small proportion of responses that go on for a longer period of time into the 2, 3, 4, 5 hour mark where there would be a cost. As well, we're looking at insurance, and I don't know all the ins and outs of this, and I think a lot of policies are different, but the insurance might cover the cost of damage to a structure for rebuilding, and may or may not, depending, cover the cost of the response fee. So they could be two different streams. And we're proposing as well that, if council accepts what we're proposing, or maybe amends it or however, but if the fees do go up to cover more of the county's costs, that we do some education and public information on that, so that people are aware and don't automatically assume that the fire response cost is included as part of their insurance policy, which normally addresses the structure replacement and coverage in that sense.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to sort of expand on what you were saying there, virtually every homeowner's policy and farm policy does have a provision for fire expenses. They're really kind of two different scenarios in the sense that our ratepayers are paying increased insurance premiums, but part of those insurance premiums that they're paying for normally does cover firefighting expenses. So it's almost two sort of separate issues in the sense that our ratepayers are certainly struggling with increased insurance premiums. Adding a cost for a response for firefighting isn't necessarily, it's not going to change what the insurance companies are going to charge. They're going to charge what they decide to charge based on their actuaries. What we're looking at is what this situation is more just a different avenue, and there's certainly, for most policies, there should be some avenue of recovery from the insured as well. So it's transferring, it may be transferring it down to the person that had to have the response, but if they do have insurance and they're paying high insurance premiums, there should be some relief from them from the company that they're already paying high premiums from.
Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But I think that the biggest difference is if you get a fire call out that involves more than one department. That's where the county really gets burned, because you only charge for, 1 hour for one group of firefighters to come. So if you have like 3 departments come, you're eating 2 of them. So that's where costs are out of hand. I don't know how you could address that differently, though.
Just go to Ann first, please.
And I think that's what we've noticed, really, having the fire services coordinator in place. It's been really beneficial for him to be able to monitor that so there aren't those multiple responses. And we've noticed really significantly, and Jen can maybe elaborate that on, we've known a real significance in the reduction of those multiple responses. Or Larry?
To add to that, Mr. Chairman, with the proposed fire service fees, we would alleviate that additional cost because the charge would be per unit that attended, it wouldn't matter which department they came from. But the idea is, let's say we give that, I think it's 90 minutes we went to, kind of first hour free, whatever you want to call it. That would give the fire services coordinator, should he still be here at the county, hopefully he's on attendance there, to say, okay, we don't need 8 trucks here on this call. 2 is sufficient. So send the rest home. And then that way the individual or the property owner is only getting charged for what's necessary, not just everybody being there because they already arrived there. So there's a bit of opportunity there to save the property owners while also ensuring that the county is recouping the costs that we have to pay out, because under the new agreements, we're paying Alberta transportation rates per unit per hour. And our current agreement is quite significantly less than that. I do have
Claus?
some examples as
Oh,
well,
sorry,
Mr.
John.
Chairman.
Claus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, if I understand this correctly, if the other, say you only need, like, for example, Picture View to come out, and then other ones come out because they're somehow notified through the system. So if they come out and they don't have to, the coordinator kind of decides that we didn't need those, do they, because they have come out, they probably still charge a certain fee, don't they?
Yes.
They will charge us a certain fee, but the property owner will get that bit of a leeway.
So why
So that
would we eat that cost? That's my question here.
I think when we were looking at the rates, and Larry can jump in if I'm incorrect, I think we're thinking, kind of like Councillor Hickey alluded to, it is a bit of a jump in how we have charged out the fire rates previously. And we thought if we gave this little bit of subsidy or break to the property owners, it may ease some of that burden to them, as well as maybe help us get the fire departments thinking, have a new way of thinking of their responses, or maybe even them themselves identifying that 8 trucks don't need to be there.
Ann?
One of the things too that the fire service coordinator, should he still be here with us in January, and he will be working on, is the dispatching and way the dispatching works. And so that would say, okay, this is your response area. So at certain types of fires, say it's a grass fire, we need these kinds of units, this many units. I mean, you can't tell all the time, obviously. It's an emergency response situation. However, that's one of the things that he was working on, so that when the actual calls go out, the right people are responding, and the right amount of people too as well.
Maybe just, once again, I realize there's a lot of moving parts here, and keeping in mind this is where we want to stay focused on the budget. I guess what stands out to me is that just that jump there, that $325,000 difference there. And as you alluded to, we are going to have this discussion. It will be coming forward in a report prior to the approval of the budget. I guess maybe just from my perspective, maybe if we could just maybe parking lots, maybe some contingencies, I suppose. I think that's obviously could have a significant impact to the budget if we decided to, go in a different direction there. So just maybe keeping that in mind, and also being cognizant that it is dependent on responses. If we were to have, a miraculous year where we didn't need that, that would also impact that as well. So maybe just having that in mind. Ann?
Yes, and also I think for council's purview too, we'll try to get the information on this bylaw out and the report out a little bit earlier, because it's not coming till the 16th on the same day that the budget is, and this will give you an opportunity to review everything. So we'll try and get that out to council a little bit earlier too. May be helpful.
Just a couple of other points. With the emergency services agreements expense under E2, so that is based on the new agreement. The only urban is Coaldale, which is still doing its annual portion that we've agreed on. So we have 2 quarters worth of data so far and calls for the other urbans. And that's sort of what I base this expense on. I did an average across the board for the upcoming year. And then with the revenues, I did about not quite 50%. So we're committed to a $2,000 per month per department fire hall fee, as well as a annual retainer of $10,000 to those departments. So that's, $30,000 or $34,000 right off the top before we even get one call.
Yeah.
And then each call is based on Alberta transportation rates, which is approximately $630 per hour per unit, depending on the type of unit. So, and then we also have those one-off, the odd medical calls or a few oddities, I guess I call them, that we don't have any ability to bill for. So we do subsidize, some of those. Also, we did do, just for, and I'll make this bigger for council. We did just want to show kind of, because it is a lot to consider and information to take in. So these are a few actual incidents that have taken place in 2021, and a bit of a description. This is what we were able to bill per the existing fire service fees bylaw. The proposed bylaw would allow us to bill this, which is of course a difference of $3,600. This is what we would owe the fire department before we take our 10%. So at the end of the day, the difference here is actually, I guess, what you could say revenue for the county, but that is to offset Amelia's time, Byron's time, Larry's time, my time, all the billing time that goes into. That's why we wrote this 10% admin fee into all of the agreements. But if you're looking down here currently under the current bylaw, it's about 16,000, where the cost is, the truer costs are upwards of 52 that we're paying, that the county is paying. So maybe.
Can you send that to me so I can send it?
Yeah. So, we've proposed a bylaw that matches the agreement. Council has to make the decision, I guess, of what service they want to offer for fire. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, so I'll have Ann send that so you have a bit more time to digest it. So that's what's been included here, and that's why you're seeing this significant change in revenues and emergency services agreements. This also includes the dispatch fees, which were reduced quite a bit for CPO when we partnered up with the MD of Tabor on that. And I'll just sorry, Larry, I'm kind of taking over for you, so I'll let you jump in there.
Tabor? Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it's 5, maybe 3. And we're looking at dispatch for fire services too, looking at all the options to see if there's some possible savings there. So yeah, looking again then, just quickly, 2022 revenues, R1, no grant funds. R2, that was, we just discussed, potential increase in fire response fees that we charge. R3, fines and revenue, slight increase, again, just based on actuals. No transfer from reserves. Expenses, E1, that reflects the position, the requested position of 1 full-time equivalent for the fire services coordinator position, hence the increase there. Emergency services agreement for E2, again, just touched on a little bit, increased expenses there, includes dispatching, and very significantly the policing costs, which increased by $117,000 from the previous year. So that's really the bulk of that E2 increase right there. E3, contract and general services adjusted for addition of 1 full-time equivalent. That would be the vehicle for the fire services coordinator.
And IT costs.
And IT costs, yeah. The bulk of it, because it's, I think, almost double from the previous year. But again, that would be if the fire services coordinator position proceeds. E4, slight reduction there, just based on actuals. E5 reduction as well. Thanks again, Doug. I think we're only in 2022, so that's looking positive there. E6, 2021, the DEM contract. Obviously, last council meeting, council approved a 1-year extension there while we review the opportunities for maybe a different framework of how DEM services are provided throughout the county. Perhaps a more regional structure is feasible, working more closely with our urban partners, and some savings could be realized there. So we've proceeded with that 1-year DEM contract extension, and I'm sure, in the next 12 months we'll figure out where that's going to land and have something more for council's consideration. E7, annual transfer to reserves, $222,000. That's been a figure that was, my gosh, calculated, I think, quite a few years ago, 10 or even maybe 15 years ago. And maybe at some point it can be adjusted, and in the next year here or so with, again, as stated and noted, the whole emergency services framework kind of in flux and many moving parts. that, you know, maybe has the opportunity to perhaps be reduced in the foreseeable future. I think for now, we're just proposing that it remain as is to kind of, you know, be conservative, I suppose, and be a little bit cautious. 2023, again, no grant funds. R2 revenues, very similar, if not identical, without going back to the previous page, to 2022. CPO and bylaw fines revenue, slight increase under R3, again, based on actuals. No transfers from reserves in R4. Expenses, just slight increases to that for E1 based on COLA increases. E2, emergency services agreement, including dispatching and policing, and that increase there is pretty much solely based on the fact that from 2022 to 2023, the county must budget an additional $235,000 for policing. So a very significant increase, for sure. We all see that loud and clear, understand that. E3, no changes. E4, no changes as well. E5, slight reduction. E6, DEM contract, it's there, you know, in anticipation of, well, again, time will tell. That's out a couple of years. Maybe that can go down if we are able to land on some sort of more regional DEM service. Maybe our costs would go down, our share of the cost for that service. E7, same annual transfer of $222,000 for equipment replacement. Looking all the way out to 2024, just about the same, I think, throughout. Noting the policing costs there. What do we have? We're not anticipating an increase. I don't think we have anything beyond that, right?
2023 and 2024, I think, are the same. From the information that I haven't received any updates since the original information that was provided, so.
Klaus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the policing cost, so 2024 is going to be a total of about $750,000. Beyond that, there hasn't been any suggestions that that was going to be increased or anything like that?
I have not seen any correspondence since that original email that went out, and actually I believe Lauren forwarded that to me, the information you received, I think, from either RMA or, was it RMA?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the only thing regarding funding that I have seen. So, and those are estimates too. I mean, our first year was very, very close. I think it was within a couple $1,000s of what they had stated. So I'm hoping they are consistent because everybody's budgeting based on that formula that they provided. But no, I haven't seen anything since.
Lauren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the biggest unanswered question from the government is, who is going to pay the 22% or 23% increase in wages? They're not suggesting anything yet, so don't know, because that'll be a significant change too.
The rate is on the police?
Yes. And it's retroactive.
Klaus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't think we've heard anything about the policing at the RCMP itself has not been notified of anything federally. So I mean, for right now, we're still the same, right? Because with the meeting that we had with the K division, they didn't mention anything.
That's a lot of why we say planned budget for the future years, because there's so many factors that we don't have control over that can impact the budget from year to year.
So, yeah, just looking again at that final year out of 2024, almost identical to 2023. I think just in inflationary costs for the most part, just about identical, very, very close in anticipated revenues and expenditures balancing out. So the biggest thing I think comes to my mind, and I'm sure everyone else's, is with community services, the recreation beyond our control, and the policing. If it weren't for those two externally imposed costs, you know, I think the department would be looking very good, and we'd be looking at probably a significant potentially significant budget decrease depending on where council decides to go with the fees and charges for fire responses. But
Okay. So I guess my first comment is that when we meet again on the 7th, we'll review municipal services. Also, I just want to confirm that we have everything on the parking lot, that I added the fire FTE because that's obviously a budget consideration of council. I had the fire services fees bylaw, so I will send Anne this spreadsheet and she'll forward that to everyone.
And I believe the report's already done for the 16th, so I'll send that to council so you can have that a bit early.
Yeah. Funding for recreation contributions, so do we want to continue to reserve fund a portion of that, all of it, none of it? And then Lauren had brought up the recreation mill rate option as well. Expand upon the property assessment, so that's more internal, I think, once we get going with what we'll do with that assessment review.
Can I just,
Through you, Chair. I think too, like, reminding that it needs to be high level. It's still, because it's a large expense for council, just kind of fleshing out a little bit more for council, and I'll be able to do that after Jen and I have a conversation next week with the assessment piece.
And then we'll bring back some, or Anne will send out some comparables prior to the next meeting, or we'll have it ready for the next meeting on council salaries as far as Reeve, Deputy Reeve, and council pay goes for neighboring partners.
we're working on it right now.
Okay, it's in the works.
And just, Lauren, before you arrived, we went through the CAO and the council portions, and that was a discussion we had regarding council remuneration, the Deputy Reeve position, and it was asked from council to provide some comparables regarding the salary structure, and then that gap between council and Reeve, Deputy Reeve, what that looked like with maybe some comparables in the region. That was what was in the parking lot regarding that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So back to the tax support impact summary. Once some decisions have been made, or if council's looking for some options, I can easily go back to this spreadsheet and say, okay, you don't want to see that increase to the fire service fees. You like it the way it is. I can just dump that out of here. I'll do it as an example, make that a zero change, and then council can see what the actual increase, what that would do to the budget, or vice versa. Maybe you want to double fire fees, and we can add that in, or whatever it might be. But yeah, this is kind of a nice working document that's really easy to modify to give you guys an estimate of what the tax support would look like if we made any of those changes. So, is there any items between now and then, or direction of council for us aside from the parking lot? Anything else that you want us to work on in the meantime?
Council? And those items from yesterday, we'll incorporate that into the discussion on the 7th as well then, Jen?
Yes, sorry. So we'll have, like Devin has a little bit of work to do on with some numbers there on some of the capital items. So yeah, we'll go through that list again and make sure that everything is clarified and you have all the information you're looking for.
Okay.
Okay, look at that, half an hour to spare, unless you want to carry on, but public operations is pretty big, so I don't even know if it's worth starting.
Start with Jeremy because
Okay.
we need it all morning for him at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do tech service, or pardon me, infrastructure services really quick. His pretty small budget, if council doesn't mind.
Then Tuesday can be Jeremy Rixon Day already.
Yeah, the
Thank you.
January show.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you. Where are you? So information or infrastructure services, I'm really struggling on that one today. Starts on page 99. And then, of course, the description is below. And Devin's budget was pretty easy to go through this year, fairly minor changes, so I'll have him just provide his explanations. Do you prefer this page? Or how do you want to do
Sure.
it? Okay.
Actually, I'll go up to this one. So The revenue is pretty much across the board. We're looking at $3,000 a year. That's primarily map sales, my inspection fees for development and things like that. That's on R2, nothing for grants. I don't anticipate hiring a summer student next year, so we don't have any grants coming in there. We go to E1, salaries, wages, and benefits. We see a slight increase there. Obviously for the COLA increase, we'll probably make up a majority of that. Contracted general services slightly went down a little bit, as Jen alluded to earlier, just looking at all of the individual budget line items and making some changes there where needed. E3, materials, supplies, and operating costs, we see a slight reduction there, again just going through each line item and reducing where needed. And then services by other departments, as others alluded to on line E4, a slight increase there, IT, fleets, things like that. So overall for 22, we're looking at an increase of $4,300 or 0.76% of my total budget. Like I said, in future years, beyond 2022, it's pretty much the same. I'm not looking for any grant funds. Revenues are pretty static, so I don't think I need to go through every single line item here. It's pretty much the same across the board. So.
And just to add, expenses within Devin's department are pretty, because he does so much capital, a lot of his costs flow through capital, but there are the odd things that come up. He maybe has some engineering services costs that are outside of a capital project, or he needs a quick engineering review before we move forward with something. Maybe they'll review an RFP he's putting out, things like that. So his budget is fairly consistent in that sense. His focus is mainly capital, and as you've seen, it's pretty full plate. So.
Short and sweet. Is there any questions? Pardon me.
Anything from council?
And you're probably, I know we say there's a 1.5% COLA included. You're not going to see an exact 1.5% increase per budget, and that's just because of adjustments for benefits, professional development, any red circled employees, etc. that fit within those categories. So it's not just a 1.5% automatic. We do look at everything that fits within that line.
Thanks, Devin.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Took 2 minutes.
You were super easy.
Are you feeling lonely over there?
You'll get a whole morning to yourself.
Actually, look at
We'll be back in this room 9:30 on December the 6th. There is advanced voting this weekend, so if you're talking to anyone, Division 5, make sure we encourage that. And then we will be back here again the following, after Monday's council meeting, we'll be back here on the 7th, 9:30, to continue on with the budget deliberations. Does that sound good?